talk about some new stuff I've been learning about hope. I'm going to be sharing with you some thoughts, some learning, and this comes from a range of places, and I suppose it comes a lot from doing solution-focused practice for 30 years or more. First trying to do solution-focused practice. If I do drop a bit, can you just let me know about? Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Pat. Yeah. So I tried to do it from a book, and then found it very hard to do that. Went on a course with Chris Iverson almost 30 years ago this year, and then started to learn how to do it. So I'm going to be sharing some thoughts with you about hope that have come from my doing hope. I'm going to talk about hope as a practice, as an activity. And also from some reading I've been doing in more recent years in some other subjects, philosophy, sociology, anthropology. And part of that reading has been in connection with research that I've been thinking about, planning, setting up, research into the role of hope in activism, and in activism in Palestine in particular. So I really appreciate the chance, the offer, the invitation to do a keynote with you, and I thought, okay, I'll do a keynote about hope, because I've been thinking so much about it. And it'll also help me, given the old adage to teach is to learn twice. So I want to just position myself, because I am a learner, in general terms, about solution-focused practice and hope, but very much about some of the stuff I'm going to talk about from philosophy, sociology and anthropology. I'm a learner, I'm not an expert. So, and I want to quote from a really wonderful book that's just been published this year and advertised this afternoon's keynote. If you haven't bought this yet, you should do so soon. Solution-Focused Practice and Mental Health Crisis, edited by the wonderful Nick Perry, sitting here. And so Nick, I'm guessing this is Nick's choice. There's a wonderful epigraph in the front of the book. And I won't read it all out because it's 4 lines long, but in this epigraph it includes, I still have to learn a lot, and I'm just learning all the time. So if it was good enough for Insu Kimberg, it's good enough for me. So that was Insu. So I'm learning all the time, and I'll share some of that learning with you. So I was thinking how to set about doing so, because you're going to hear about a lot of stuff in the next 40 minutes, and I was wondering how to structure my talk, and I thought I'll do it pretty much chronologically. I'll share some thoughts and learning about hopes in the order that I had the thoughts, more or less. So that took me back to 30 years ago on a course on solution-focused practice. So I was going to start talking from 1995 onwards, starting to learn solution-focused practice in earnest, and then I thought, hang on, I'd learnt a lot about hope before that. So I started Googling, when do you start learning about hope in childhood? And I was hoping, actually, that a Ladybird book might come out of Google. And I discovered that Tootles the Taxi is a very rare Ladybird book, and I've got a copy. So anyway, that's just an aside. So I didn't learn about hope in Ladybird books, but this is very important, so I'm going to stand here and... but of course, we've now got AI to help us with such matters. So AI on Google... AI on Google said children can understand and use the word hope in their speech as early as ages 2 and 3, though the concept of hope likely develops earlier. While toddlers may not fully grasp the nuanced definition of hope, they can use it in simple sentences to express desires or wishes for the future. So could you just decide who you're going to pair up with for the next 2.5 minutes? So can you just maybe talk to someone, just to save time, talk to someone sitting nearby you. So pairs is best, 3s will be okay. Oh. Okay. So pause a moment, stop talking about something else. And I want to ask you to talk about this. Just cast your minds back to when you were 2 or 3 years old? And what did you know about hope already? And if that's a bit tricky, just cast your minds back as far as you can cast them into childhood. And have a little, you're going to have 2.5 minutes. What did you first learn about hope back then? Off you go. Okay, so let's jump forward. I'm going to jump forward 30 years, in my case, 30 years to 1995. And when I went to my first training course with what was then the brief therapy practice, run by Chris Iveson. And so I didn't hear the question, what are your best hopes from our work together at that course, because it hadn't been coined at that time. So in fact, it might well be on that 4-day course that the word hope or hopes wasn't used at all. So one thing that I'm wondering about at the moment is whether solution-focused practice has always, well, whether it is a hopes-centred, hopes-focused approach, and I think it is, and whether it always has been, even before the word hope was perhaps used in many of the questions or the talking about it. But I think on that 4-day course with Chris, the word hope or hopes might have been mentioned, might not have been. And the question I learned that I started to use at the start of my sessions, where I now use the question typically, what are your best hopes from our work together, was what needs to happen for our work together to be useful for you. I actually still got the course notes, the course handouts from that 1995 course, and that question isn't listed in the list of questions for this opening part of a solution-focused meeting. One question that is how would you know at the end of our session today that it was worthwhile coming? So there's been a whole range of ways of starting solution-focused work. I think it's unlikely that I would use that question now, and I think it's unlikely that people at Brief would use that question now. How would you know at the end of this session that it was worth your while coming? Because it's very close to the session. We're more likely to want to help the client think about themselves further into the future. So it's almost sort of confusing process and outcome. Process of the session from outcome from the session. And this was in 1995 when I went on that course, and later, working and spending a lot of time with Brief, Chris told me that during the 1990s, they were really grappling with the distinction between process and outcome. So they were trying different questions and grappling with their own sort of clarity about the difference, but also questions that become clear to the person hearing the question about, is outcome being asked about or is process being asked about? Anyway, that's the question that I asked for the first few years, primarily in my solution-focused work. Then I went on a number of staying Brief, follow-up courses down at Brief. The first 2 or 3 I went on were again Chris. Initially I thought Evan and Harvey were sort of made up to make it sound like a big organisation. It's just this little one-man band inventing Harvey Ratner and Evan George. But I ended up going on a course with Evan, and I might have said to him, "You exist!" Anyway, I didn't. But it was a course with Chris actually in 1999. Staying Brief with Children and Families, it might have been called. And one videotape I saw, we all saw him showing, he asked a question a bit like this, but it definitely had the word best. It might have had the word hope in it, in the singular, best hope. What are your best hopes from our work together? So when I first heard that question being asked on that video by Chris, I think one of my reactions was, that's a slightly odd phrase to use, slightly odd wording. But when I started using it, I realised that the period between 1999 and 2004 was when I started working at Brief, with Brief. I don't have a strong recall about these issues, but I think I probably started using what are your best hopes from our work together as my typical opening question. Having started working at Brief, I guess I had to, it's probably in the job description that you asked what are your best hopes from our work together. But so that became, and is up to now, my favourite way of beginning a solution-focused session. Word got around quite slowly at first because Brief was so busy working, training and doing therapy that they weren't writing any books at that time, 2004-05. but via training courses and conferences, this was getting out there. And I was at a conference in one of the EBTA conferences in Salamanca in 2005. And the Swedish solution-focused practitioner, a really nice guy called Jürgen, was having a chat with me very late one night at the bar, and saying, he must have come and done a course, I think, at Brief. He said, I really like the way you guys work at Brief, and this question you ask, what are your best hopes from our work together? He said, I like it, but it's, when you translate it into Swedish, it sounds odd. And so he was, is there any other way I can ask it? I said, well, I don't know, but it sounds odd in English to me. And he said, oh, does it really? And he emailed me a short while after that to say, since that conversation, he's been translating it quite straight, and it was being very helpful to him. So the question, this wording, this idea of asking about hope started to trickle out there. And in 2007, at an event that, at the end of the year that Insu passed away, and we had invited Insu to do a presentation at the end of 2007. So given that that wasn't possible, the five of us who worked at Brief at the time, Chris, Ed and Harvey, and Yasmin, Ajmal and myself, did a joint presentation for 2 days. And Yasmin and I did a presentation on the best hopes question. We might have called it the best hopes question. And it might have been for that presentation, but we talked about this stuff all the time, but it might have been for then that I asked Chris about the origins of how did you come to think about asking about hopes and best hopes. And I don't recall my question very vividly, but I recall Chris's answer vividly, which is something about solution focus. It's the answers that are important. But Chris, I'm not sure Chris knew how to answer that question really, but I think his answer was, it's always fascinated me. And he said, well, it might have been prefaced by, I don't know, but it's just what we're interested in, isn't it? It's just, meaning hopes, best, it's just what we're interested in, isn't it? And so, I'm not sure I've had a conversation with Chris about that since, and it would be nice to do so. But that's, yeah, hopes is just what we're interested in, isn't it? Is that the case? That's really, that question for me suffuses my whole talk, as I hope you'll see by the time I get to the end of it. So we did that presentation, and then I think a very significant event was when Yasmin had gone elsewhere for a while, and we were invited to go and do an opening plenary at the American conference, the SFPTA conference in Austin, Texas. And so Chris, Harvey, Evan and I went in the end of 2008, and again presented on the best hopes question. And we all showed clips of ourselves asking clients, what are your best hopes from this? And I think that was significant in getting the word further out there in terms of using those words and asking that question, and then everything else that came from that. There was a young Elliot Connie in the audience, I think it was in his early days of coming across Solution Focus, that was the end of 2008. So we were presenting on the best hopes question, not so much on the whole brief approach. So there was an element of, so looking back now, there's an element of sort of separating off bits of the approach. And where I'm coming to in this talk is solution focus being a hope-focused approach in the round. Solution focus being a hope-focused approach. And so I think that was sort of got to by degrees, really, that position. Just a thought I've had more recently about, there's a tendency within solution-focused practice for us to talk about the certain question, which I think started in Milwaukee. A very clear example is the miracle question. And now that's the tomorrow question, the best hopes question, and other such questions. And I've got some reservations about that, because it sort of strikes me that it makes the questions into set-piece events, and as opposed to a flowing process. So it's almost like, hang on a sec, you might say to the client, just go and get a wheelbarrow. So I'm just going to push it up, tip it out, pick it up. I'm going to ask you this question here. So you bring in the miracle question or the best hopes question. And I think part of brief development, the sharpening of Occam's razor, and often, almost always, I I think at one time, certainly in my case, not using the miracle question, but just having heard about some hope, saying, suppose that had happened. When you wake up tomorrow morning, what would you notice? And there's more of a flow, I think, from going into it like that, rather than getting a wheelbarrow with the miracle question inside it and tipping it out. Okay, so then I think Mark refers to this really nicely. Mark, if you haven't seen Mark's book, Mark McCurgo, sitting here, Next Generation of Solution-Focused Practice, I think Mark says, and I think it might be the case, for the first time that, because the brief version, as I call it in my book that was first published in 2014, the brief version of Solution-Focused Practice, which is a double meaning, because it's the version developed at brief, and it is, I think research suggests it is typically briefer. And asking about best hopes at the outset is a big part of that. As is sharpening Occam's razor, suppose you wake up tomorrow, rather than the wheeled-in miracle question. And then asking about instances of the preferred future that have happened already. So that's putting all that together, and it becomes an overall approach, not just different questions. And that was first written about, I think, in the chapter I wrote with Chris, published in 2011 or 12, in Cynthia Franklin et al.'s book about the research at the time in Solution Focused. So that takes us up into about 2012. Just an added thought before I move on to 2014. In terms of why this question was becoming popular, I think part of the reason is Chris's answer to my question. Well, it's just, that's what we're interested in, isn't it? Meaning hopes. Maybe it's a clear question for clients to hear, in terms of we want clients to hear and start thinking about outcome at the beginnings of our work with them, rather than thinking about the process of the work. I'm hoping you can help me in some way, or I'm hoping that I can feel better. But I think also it might have been another aspect of comparing these two questions. I think having single words to refer to that single words that contain huge concepts is very useful in teaching the approach and getting hold of the approach and then helping us to conceptualise the approach. Think of the word exceptions. One of the original cornerstones of Solution Focus was one word, exceptions. And that one word says so much, exceptions to problems. And so that's why when I was at Brief, and the Brief version being developed through the 90s into the 2000s, and exceptions, the language of exceptions was still being used. Even though the Brief, I was trained in 95, as I said, and I never really had a concept of exceptions in my head when I'm working with clients. I'm thinking about what the outcomes they want, what that would look like in the future, and how they're already moving towards that. And I almost then said, and instances of that's happening. But that word wasn't being used. And so the word exceptions was still being used to refer to progress towards a preferred future. But exceptions, that language goes back to problem. So one question was, what words can we use instead of the word exceptions in its place? And the word instances was sort of hit upon. So having single words, hopes, miracles, possibility, instances, exceptions, I think is helpful in terms of conveying the approach, thinking about the approach. So the word hopes jumps out of that second question there. And the first question, needs, happenings, usefulnesses, a word doesn't jump out. So I think that's another element of the usefulness of the best hopes question. So, continuing the chronology, I'm going to wonder how to bring that back. I'm just going to talk about the index of the book that I had published in 2014. Solution-Focused Practice. I should have said that when I said about the course in 95, maybe hope and hopes as words weren't really mentioned. I was then starting to read books by Steve, the Shader in particular, other solution-focused books. And I don't think hope and hopes were mentioned in those books much either. And I did some checking as part of preparing for this talk. And so skimming through all of Steve's books, there's very little, if any, mention of the words hope and hopes in those books. A little bit more in indices, but not much. really. And then as part of my background reading for this talk, I read a nice article by Bob Blundo, Kristin Bolton and Christopher Hall from University of North Carolina in Wilmington, about hope in solution-focused practice. You'll find it hard to get hold of this article, perhaps. It was published in a journal called the International Journal of Solution-Focused Practices. It was a fairly short-lived journal, but I've got a PDF of it. If anyone wants it, I'll send it to you. I'm reading that. So I read this not long after I was skimming through indices of Steve's books and Insu's books and other books. And in this article about hope and solution-focused practice, they'd gone through the same process. This is a 2014 article. And they said, hope doesn't seem to get discussed much in solution-focused practice. And we've been looking through some indexes, and hope rarely sort of is mentioned. And this article was published in 2014. There's Shennan, 2014. I thought, wow, they got hold of that book quickly. And I thought, oh, so it wasn't mentioned in my index either. So I had a look at the index of my book, and I looked under H for hope. And there you are. Some wonderful solution-focused people in that index, such as Paul Hampton and John Hendon, who are here. And but there's no hope. There's no hope in that index. I thought, wow, no hope in that index. Of course, hang on. Let's just come forward a bit. There's no hope or hopes. But under B, there's loads under best hopes. Loads under best hopes. And it continues to the next page. Best hopes. So that's the first edition. The second edition, I don't know what was going on in my head, but I thought, well, I better write hopes there and see best hopes. So in solution-focused practice, you can't really, hopes have just got best sort of tied to it. And so there you go. So now I want to introduce a little bit of anthropology, or quote an anthropologist called Steph Jansen. You'll notice the title of my keynote is Solution-Focused Practice and Hope, bracket S. So, this is an article I read a year or so ago, and a guy called Steph Jansen, in a special issue of a journal called Anthropology, History and Anthropology. And it's the edition's called Hope Over Time, Crisis, Immobility and Future Making. Interestingly, in the introductory article, they talk about there's a hope boom in anthropology. And this was published in 2016, and they associated that with the time of crisis and unpredictability the world's in, and the lack of political and ideological direction. 2016, which is when Brexit happened and Trump was first elected, and other crises and things happening. So it's a time when hope booms, and this is when people hope, when people need to hope. That's just a sort of aside, really. Steph Jansen had an article in that journal. And so in the article, so it's all about research, going out into the world as anthropologists, ethnographers, the sort of researchers who go and hang out with people to find out about stuff in the world. And they're wanting to find out about hope. You have to have an idea, what is it we're researching? So you have to conceptualise something. What is hope? And there's a nice subheading in this article by Steph Jansen, which is what do we talk about when we talk about hope? And he says that he'd been a bit confused at times about the conceptualisation of hope. And because it does mean different things at different times. And he came to what he believes, and I agree with him, is a useful analytical distinction between two modalities of hope, his words, an intransitive modality. So hope as an affect or emotion. Hope. Hopefulness. Feeling hopeful. And hope as a transitive meaning. Hope. To hope for something. To hope that something. So a transitive verb, as opposed to just having hope, or being hopeful. And he uses the word hopes for the transitive one. You have hopes. If you hope for something, you hope that something happens. You hope you feel better. And you probably hope for more than one thing. So you have hopes. And I thought, wow, okay, this is it. I'm there. This is helpful. And this is why I have hopes in my index. Mark's book, Next Generation, has got hopes in his index. No hope is there. Books by Brief have got hopes in their index, but we don't have hope in our index. We could have, because hope is there, but we could have hope in any therapy's index. Hope is one of the common factors across psychotherapy. So I would say that solution-focused practice is a hopes-focused approach, because we ask people about their hopes and then we continue those hopes, organise the rest of our work with people. And the person might become more hopeful, the person might experience hope. But that will be the case, the common factors approach to psychotherapy research across all therapies. So that's not distinctive about solution-focused practice, whereas focusing on hopes is. And I think just to add to this, a thought I've had, which I'm sort of wary of sharing, because I'm just sort of parting company with, or seeing something a bit different than Insu Kinberg, who wrote about hope as an effect, I think, in some of her books. And Steph Jansen adds in this article, hope is a relational phenomenon over historical time. Over historical time, it shifts, it changes, people hope for different things. But it's a relational phenomenon. So hardly any of the articles I've read talk about hopes from a particular activity, like therapy. They talk about hope, hoping for a better life, hoping for this, that and the other, but not tied to. So I think in solution-focused practice, hope is a relational phenomenon. It's about the hope, the relationship with the client and the therapist. What are your best hopes from our work together? And what I call the fundamental assumption of solution-focused practice is, if somebody comes to see me, if someone talks with me, they must hope that something will come from that. So I think the hopes comes from the client in the first instance. And I think that's because of seeing it as hopes rather than hope. So one thing that Insu writes more than once in several of her books is a gift that a therapist can give to a client is hope. And I'd rather think about, so that's relational as well, but I think seeing it as hopes is, we're starting off with the client's hopes. So Insu often quoted the phrase leading from one step behind, from two Australian family therapists, Cantwell and Holmes. It's a lovely idea, and I think that's what we do, leading from one step behind, but the client is leading in a sense that we're working with their hopes. They have hopes from working with us. They have these relational hopes. Okay, so that's the first tranche of what I'm going to say. I'm just going to look at my notes for the next 2 minutes. Could you turn to somebody else that you turned to before? It'll only take about 5 seconds to do so, just to save time. And then one of you could just say to the other, so what do you reckon? And just have a chat for 2 minutes, okay? So, slight shift in emphasis now. So I think I was developing and had developed a practical understanding of hopes, very much assisted by Steph Jansen in thinking about this hopes and hope difference after the event, really. But I knew I was asking about hopes because I put hopes in the index and I didn't put hope in the index in my book. So useful to develop a theoretical understanding as well, I think, and as does Gail Miller. And just put a quote up to have a glance at. So at the EBTA, European Brief Therapy Association conference in Malmo in 2010, there was a wonderful panel where many of the surviving members of the original Milwaukee team were there, and Gail Miller. So Gail Miller wasn't sort of in the Brief Family Therapy Centre team as such. He was a sociologist who spent a lot of time with them, very close with Steve DeShazer, researching what they did, and wrote a wonderful book called Becoming Miracle Workers as a result of that research. And at this conference, when they were just reflecting on how solution-focused brief therapy was developed, because Steve in particular was very interested in philosophy, and all sorts of philosophers, and he's sort of moved towards Wittgenstein in a big way in his later years. And Gail said that there was a very conscious nurturing of this other side, and he means by this other side philosophy and stuff like that, that gave SFBT a dimension that made it very different than if it's only about practice. And that's been continued. Can I mention you again, Mark? Because this 2017, the UKASFP conference was a joint event with Hessian, which I've forgotten the acronym, that Mark had set up at the University of Hertfordshire in Hatfield, and really looking at the connections between philosophy and solution focus, to put it in a short way. And so very useful to do this, and I'm finding it very useful at the moment. So a bit of a whistle-stop tour of some of the stuff I'm finding out and thinking about. And before I thought about doing the research that I'm currently involved in, I picked up a book because I liked the title. A book called Hope Without Optimism by Terry Eagleton. And 3 books that I'm going to refer to, I literally bought because I liked the title. And this is the first of them. And it was published in 2015. And I've got a hardback, and I think I bought it very early on, so maybe in 2015. There's a nice review of this book by Louise Bauer-Hatchard. I'm not sure I've ever met Louise. She's not here, is she? I wondered if Louise would be here because she's based in Sheffield, just down the road. It's in the Journal of Solution-Focused Practices. I won't mention Mark a third time, but he's the editor of it, and it's all free and online. And 2020, a really nice review. You'll hear more about Terry Eagleton's book from that review than I've got time to mention here. So have a look at that. But it helped me to get clear about a number of things reading this book and to learn a hell of a lot of new things. One thing I got clear about from Hope Without Optimism is the difference between hope and desire, between hope and want. And learning from Steve DeShazer onwards, the fundamental question, what does the client want? But we shifted this wording to what are your best hopes? What's the difference between hope and want, hope and desire? And so one thing I got from Terry Eagleton's book was the simple hope is desire for something plus a belief that it's possible that it will happen. It certainly helps when you're running training courses and people say, what if people say something that it's impossible to have? And you can say, well, asking about their hopes is very helpful in that respect, because hopes imply something that it is possible. And I got lots of other nice ideas from Terry Eagleton's book. Yeah, just to flesh out that difference. So hope suggests something that is possible, such as, I hope we all have a good conference. So I want that to be the case, and I believe it's possible. Actually, that's different. I'm confident. It's a dead cert. It's going to be a good conference. So hope and confidence are also different things. But anyway, at the end of the conference, I might say to people, I hope to see you again. I hope to see you soon. Okay, I want to, and we might be able to. Wizard. So just to think about the difference between hope and desire. Wishes doesn't mean they're going to happen. The Evergreen Christmas single by Wizard. I wish it could be Christmas every day. It's not going to happen, even though Wizard wanted it to happen. So that's not a hope. That's not a hope. Okay. So other things I got from Terry Eagleton's book. I'm going to share 3 quotes from it, all by philosophers that I've shared on a number of workshops and seminars that I've taken part in, and that I really like. Paul Ricoeur. I hope I pronounced that name right. French philosopher. Hope is passion for the possible. Thomas Aquinas. Hope is a movement or stretch of appetite towards some difficult good. Steve and Insu talk about well-formed goals. It has to take an effort to get there. Interesting that he says it's a difficult good. Immanuel Kant. To hope for the supreme good is to be obliged to exercise all one's powers to bring it about. I think I found the emphasis on movement and action really important. I don't know, when I'm teaching, I all the time talk about how solution-focused practice is all about movement towards, and I'm constantly moving. Supreme good, rather than supreme good in Immanuel Kant's words, the client's best hopes. So it's movement towards. And as I was reading around before this talk, I came across a philosopher called Adrienne Martin, and she wrote a book called How We Hope, and she refers to and contrasts a couple of things, definitions of hope, and this is what I've just said that I got clarity from reading Eagleton's book, and it's called, apparently, in philosophy, the orthodox definition of hope. Hoping for an outcome is simply desiring it while thinking it's possible. In contrast, the agent-centered view is hoping for an outcome is setting oneself to pursue it. Hence the stretch of appetite towards a difficult good. It's going to involve action. I've not read this book, and I think it's going to be quite hard work, so I'm going to read it, and if I'm invited in 10 years' time to do another presentation, because apparently philosophers have gone beyond even these 2 definitions, and they're saying that more goes on when people are hoping for something than just this. But I think this is useful in itself. Hoping for an outcome is setting oneself to pursue it. I was thinking, if I said to one of you, hi, nice to see you, hope you have a good conference. Yeah, top one, I hope you have a good conference. I want you to have a good conference. I believe it's possible you will have a good conference. Am I setting myself to do something about that? Well, possibly. But if I think to myself, I hope I have a good conference, I think I've got to do something about that, really. I've got to do something to have a good conference. I hope that we all have a good conference. Maybe we can think about collective hopes. And I hope we all have a good conference. All agreed? Yes. I think there's something in the second one, setting oneself to pursue it. And it reminded me of Steve DeShazer, which I heard him ask at the beginning of many of his sessions with clients. He didn't use the word hope, but I think this collective setting oneself to pursue a hoped-for outcome. I guess there's no guarantees this will be useful, but I assume that we'll both do our best to make it so. So setting oneself to work towards an outcome. Okay, so I better race through some stuff, and I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll talk about 3 people all at once now. I'll talk about Richard Rorty, philosopher, Ernst Bloch, another philosopher, and anthropologist let's go forward a bit. Hirokazu Miyazaki. So Hirokazu Miyazaki wrote another book I bought because of the title. Why wouldn't you? The Method of Hope. I thought, I'm going to buy that book. And in that book, he's an anthropologist. He decides to research hope, and he develops what he calls the Method of Hope. And he draws on 2 philosophers, 2 or 3, but 2 of them are Richard Rorty and Ernst Bloch. And when I started reading Miyazaki's book, I thought, wonderful, I've already been reading Richard Rorty, philosopher. So let's just skip back a bit. And a book that I saw at my brother-in-law's house, Philosophy and Social Hope, and I thought, I'm going to buy that book, I like that title. And I've become interested in solution-focused practice, social change, political change, not just for individual change, as many other people had as well. One of the first times that that interest began to develop, 2017, the Frankfurt Solution-Focused Conference, when there was an open space discussion on solution-focused practice and politics. And the 2018 UKASFP conference, Susie organised with Steve Flatt, and had a stream of workshops and panels about solution-focused practice and social justice or social change. So the rest of my talk, my thinking about it, that's partly why I'm researching hope in activism now, because of these ideas. And that's why I picked up this book by Richard Rorty. And there's one of the sections of the book it's called Hope in Place of Knowledge. That gets you curious, right? What could that? Hope in Place of Knowledge. And there's three lectures that are turned into essays in this section. And so I'm going to summarise a heck of a lot of philosophy in a couple of sentences. But Richard Rorty is a pragmatist philosopher. And in these 3 essays, what he says he's doing and what he does is to convey he sees pragmatism, which is a branch of philosophy, fairly modern, late 19th century, 20th century, especially in the US, as a branch of philosophy that's proposing that we change the way that we think about philosophy from Western traditional philosophy, starting from Plato onwards. And whereas traditional philosophy is about getting to know the world, assuming that there's eternal truths in the world, essences in the world, reality that we can get to know. And the pragmatist philosophers don't believe there are any essences or eternal truths that we can get to know. And rather than the task being to get to know the world, to uncover these hidden truths, they believe the task of a philosopher is to engage with the world, to respond to the world, to cope with the world, and to help change the world. So it's a very active approach. And it also reorientates knowledge from looking back at the past and wondering about eternity, eternal truths, to focusing on the future. So the task, rather than being knowing the world in a retrospective act of contemplation, the task of philosophy and other disciplines is to look forward to create better human futures. So that's what Richard Rorty sets out in this book and elsewhere in his writings. He writes beautifully And so I'm just sharing some quotes from the book. This is from the preface. He says, in his view, the best candidate for the most distinctive and praiseworthy human capacity is our ability to trust and cooperate with other people, and in particular to work together so as to improve our future. What pragmatists hope is not that the future will conform to a plan, but rather that the future will astonish and exhilarate. What pragmatists share is their principled and deliberate fuzziness. I'm already over time, partly because we started a few minutes late. Andrew we can catch up at lunchtime in particular, but I need to shorten anyway, even given that. And so I'm not going to be able to unpack some of these quotes. But for me, principle, and I think they fit with solution-focused. We're not working towards a plan. There's not goals being set and plans to follow. Futures emerge. And hopes are fuzzy. They're not smart goals. So there's a connection for me there. In another of his Hope in Place of Knowledge essays, he writes, this element of romantic hope, the willingness to substitute imagination for certainty, is hope in place of knowledge, and curiosity for pride, breaks down the Greek distinction between contemplation and action. He's referring to Plato, etc. So, I'm going to have to decide, as I stand here and speak, which bits to drop. I'll just mention this book in passing, which I was going to anyway. Ernst Bloch, who has a chapter to himself in Terry Eagleton's book, Hope Without Optimism, wrote a massive book called The Principle of Hope. It's a 20th century Marxist philosopher, an incredible piece of work. And the second time I came across him was when I picked up this book in 2022, which led to my decisions about doing research about hope. A sociologist, a music sociologist, Tia Denora, a lovely little book called Hope. It's small, so you can read it. It's very easy to read. Recommend it. To hope is she writes about hope as a practice, as an activity. Been very influential on me. And to hope is to engage in activity oriented to the realisation of a dream. And Ernst Bloch, she refers to Ernst Bloch in the book. Ernst Bloch was going to call his book The Principle of Hope, Dreams of a Better Life. Let me just say a little bit about Ernst Bloch. This wonderful quote from the beginning of that book, his overall idea is that the world is unfinished. The world is becoming. The world is open rather than a closed world. All the plan is set. The job is to uncover these hidden truths. The world is unfinished. The world is developing and becoming, and it's full of propensity towards something, tendency towards something, latency of something. The stuff latent in the world. And here about towards hopes, instances of hopes, a lot of connections there, really. Let me show you this nice idea of a picture. I can't without telling you about this, really. He talks about the two... Time. Come and chat to me in the break about the two edges of consciousness. So, I want you to do a little exercise before we finish off. Now, I think he talks about the not yet conscious, as you can see from the second bullet point. And it's very difficult to read, Ernst Bloch, but there's some beautiful stuff in there. One of his other central ideas is the not yet. He says that philosophy is only geared up, Western philosophy, to look at the past and present and eternity, but not to the future. And he says possible futures are part of reality as the past and present are, but philosophy, because of its retrospective, contemplative nature, isn't able to deal with it, can't apprehend it. So Bloch creates a new philosophy, a philosophy of the future. And the not yet, which is both, philosophy can't deal with what's not become yet, only with what has become. So he talks about the not yet become and the not yet conscious. And I got hold of the not yet conscious because these are pretty tricky ideas, I think. When in a section he wrote called Two Edges, and he said there's two edges of consciousness, because he talks about Freud and the unconscious. That's the no longer conscious. In Freud's unconscious is stuff we've forgotten and possibly repressed. So that's going back. So there's two edges. One is that stuff, the edge that things move past in our consciousness into, we've forgotten it, we've repressed it. There's another edge where things are coming into it. There's a beyond which what is not yet conscious dawns. Isn't that a wonderful idea? So, and he talks a lot about daydreams. And the book was going to be called Dreams of a Better Life. I came by train yesterday. My friend Tim, down in London, is an artist. And when I'm travelling on a train, I say to him, I can't wait, I love travelling on trains. I'm going to go, time to read. And he says, don't read. Look out of the window. Just daydream. And Block talks about when we daydream, that's when the not yet consciousness is, things come into it. So I looked out of the window yesterday and daydreamed for a bit. Thought about Tim, thought about this talk, which I'm going to have to end in a moment. And, but I want to show one more slide. Well, so Miyazaki drew on Rorty and Block because he went to Fiji to research something. He ended up researching hope, and he hit a methodological problem because he was studying the acts of hoping by Fijians that he was working with, and he said he was trying to analyse their hope and their hoping, and he said he couldn't do it because the retrospective treatment of hope as a subject of description forecloses the possibility of describing the prospective momentum inherent in hope. The newness or freshness of the prospective moment that defines that moment as hopeful is lost. So he then went to Rorty and Block, who were saying the same thing about knowledge generally. And we haven't got a philosophy of the future because it's not geared to it, hence the philosophy that Block created. And so Miyazaki decided to stop studying hope as a subject, and this to me connects with hope as hopefulness and hope as hopes, and hope as a process of knowledge formation. And even though I've reread and reread, I still don't quite grasp what he's saying. So if any of you were sitting there thinking, I don't grasp this at all, neither do I. Isn't this great? You've got a lecturer not grasping something, talking to... So, but it's part of my not yet consciousness. Really, it's starting to dawn. It's dawning. So he describes the method of hope. And I just thought, so one thing I took from this is, I think solution-focused practice is a method of hope. And we ask people what their best hopes are. It's not a standalone question. It's part of an overall method of hope. And I was going to talk about I was going to show some slides about two sociologists, another paper that I find useful, looking back at recent sociological treatments of hope. And they say, this is published in 2019, they say often hope is seen as either focusing on the future or focusing on the present as a psychosocial resource, hope to get you through chronic illness, difficult times. And they're saying we need to have a unified concept of hope. So I believe solution-focused practice provides a unified concept of hope, because the whole thing is about hope. As Chris said, it's just what we're interested in, isn't it? We ask people what their best hopes are. What would hopes realised look like? How is that already emerging? It's all there in that one word, hope. So I think hope provides, solution-focused practice provides a unified concept of hope. And I think hopes provides a unified concept for solution-focused practice. Thank you, and let's all have a great conference.